Thank you to all of you, especially our CAL FIRE leaders, but thank you, Congressman, thank you, Senator Dodd, Senator McGuire, thank you to the supervisors, thank you to all of you assembled, thank you to the volunteers, thank you to this community for their spirit, deep sense of pride that you feel as you visit these sites, large and small, to the broader community that is California that's being impacted by this challenging moment in our history with, I'm cautious when I say this, but near historic wind event at a scale and scope, the likes of which we haven't seen in some time. That precipitated today with a new statewide emergency declaration because 43 counties now are impacted by red flag warnings and by these severe weather conditions. We've been battling fires all up and down the state now for close to a week. From San Diego, 2 major fires now that are 97% contained, fires in Los Angeles County that have generated national headlines, in particular Tick Fire, where we feel we finally have got our arms around that fire. In fact, we're bringing some resources that were on that fire here into Northern California to tackle the challenges we're experiencing. From Grass Valley to Mount Diablo to Contra Costa to parts of Northern California, including a fire up near Ukiah, which is now close to 350 or so acres, 20% contained. We're continuing to see flare-ups all throughout the state. And obviously, some of that smoke, that plume over the San Francisco Bay Area in Crockett area only highlighted that sense of vulnerability that I know millions of Californians are feeling at this moment, not only from the perspective of these fires, but obviously now this overlay with 1 million+ customers that are dealing with yet again the incredible inconvenience around issues of PSPS, blackouts, the lights being turned off, not only by the largest investor-owned utility in the state of California here in the northern part of the state, PG&E, but also by the other 2 investor-owned utilities in Los Angeles region and San Diego Gas and Electric. So the combination of all of these factors make for a moment in our history that we hope we don't have to repeat. But point of caution, consideration, point of emphasis that Senator Dodd advanced that by no means is completely novel. The stress, the anxiety, particularly people are feeling here in the northern state in 2014, in 2015, a little bit of respite in 16, but then historic wildfires in 17, and then topping all of that off, that Camp Fire and the Woolsey Fire punctuating north and south, the worst wildfire season California had ever had in its history. And while we began this year feeling some confidence, we invested over $1 billion of new emergency preparation, new equipment, new suppression strategies, pre-positioning of assets. There was a sense of confidence as we moved through July, August, September into October, hoping that we'd actually make it through. But what is inevitable this time of year is what we're experiencing this time of year, winds. The Diablo winds in the northern part of the state, the Santa Ana winds in the southern part of the state, combined with low humidity, create these conditions and spark this kind of anxiety. But that spark often happens, but it doesn't usually happen at the scale unless transmission lines and utilities are involved. And it goes without saying, in the spirit of the recognition from the congressman that we have a lot of work to do to underground our wires, to harden our equipment, to continue our vegetation management and forest management, to make sure we address this sense of vulnerability head on, and to hold our utilities accountable, particularly Pacific Gas and Electric. As many of you know, we began the year in earnest trying to tackle these issues, not only with historic investments, not only by pre-positioning assets, but by getting money out in our communities. We passed a piece of legislation. I'm grateful to the leadership behind me that provided $50 million for communities large and small to begin their emergency planning efforts. We initiated a series of efforts that led to $75 million appropriation that I was able to get out the last few days to help support emergency planning efforts, backup efforts, and supplement the state and federal efforts. $26 million to the counties, $10 million directly to the cities, including tribal lands in the state of California. The executive order, the emergency declaration today, will provide additional capacity to provide access to resources, be it unemployment insurance, deal with tax-related issues, the franchise tax board, resources to allow for contracts to be procured in a more expedited manner, as well as providing more equipment to come into the state without the usual paperwork attached to it, as well as backup generation and equipment that doesn't have to necessarily go through some of our air quality standards because of the acuity of this moment. So that's what that declaration will provide. In addition, we have been blessed, and I want to once again thank the Trump administration and FEMA for their quick response and support with the federal declaration that allows reimbursements and allows us to have the confidence that we can scale our efforts in a way where resources are secondary to the immediate needs of our community. So thank FEMA for all their extraordinary work. I want to as well thank OES, our Office of Emergency Services. We began the day there at Camp Mather, all hands, all of our federal partners in addition to FEMA, but also the local men and women in uniform. Not only the mutual aid, the firefighters, but also the sheriffs, the remarkable work of our public safety officers, local law enforcement, as well as the California Highway Patrol. Here's where we are. Here's where we need to go. Let me be precise. Kincaid fire remains the most stubborn challenge that we face and is immediately of top priority and focus. Over 3,000 individuals are working just on the Kincaid fire. It currently is no longer 10% contained. It has slipped a little bit only because of now the scope and size. It's now north of 50,000 acres. It was last advertised around 35,000 acres and 10% contained. What we're trying to do, it skipped Highway 128. We're trying to hold the line at Highway 101 in and around the towns of Windsor. I'm the mayor of Windsor here, and I just want to thank him and Vice Mayor and the incredible resiliency that they have placed. He slept not a wink, and I just want to thank him for working so hard behind the scenes and all your incredible work that is not unnoticed by all of us and your community and the town of Healdsburg. We're doing everything we can to hold the line there and protect those structures and continue to make sure people that were supposed to be evacuating have evacuated. Go means go. When we call for an evacuation, evacuate. And we've evacuated close to 180,000 people, plus or minus. And people are being evacuated all throughout the northern part of the state. I have visited a number of shelters throughout the day, not here only in Petaluma, but down in Nevada, where we visited some of the hospitals, as Kaiser up here, the veterans up here, Veterans Memorial Hospital and Regional Hospital have all had to disperse their patients throughout the region. And we want to make sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable, and I think we're doing justice to that cause. But again, this is an imperfect process, and we want to fill in blanks where we are falling short. Communication always remains an issue. I was in American Canyon yesterday in a mobile home park. They were alerted not 48 hours before the power was shut down, but 4 hours before the power was shut down. So don't get me wrong. I'm not here to inflate the efforts. There's still areas of gaps, and we have work to do. I want to thank the businesses that have worked with the state to remain open. Some of the largest retailers in the country that happen to do business in this state are working as backup and providing critical medical needs by keeping their pharmacies open, by keeping their hours of operation expanded, and providing food, fuel, diapers, fill in the blank. So all hands focusing on Kincaid, do what we can up there on that Ukiah fire before it flares up, being vigilant with all our pre-positioned assets throughout the rest of the state as we work through the peak of this wind event. We're now moving to the other side of that peak wind. Open by 11 tomorrow. The winds will have substantially settled down, not completely, but substantially. We had peak winds. We had some reports of up to 90 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour. I put that in perspective. The campfire, the night before the campfire, we had 60, 65 mile an hour peak winds. We've had peak winds north of 80 miles an hour. So this is a unique and challenging moment, an event, but we are unique and challenging people and challenged only by contrast, meaning I'll put up the fortitude, the grit, the resolve, the community spirit. This community, this state up against any. They've been through a lot. We're going through a lot, but we're going to get out stronger, more resilient than ever, and we're going to have an IOU that doesn't look like the IOU today, utility that does not look like the utility today, one that's more capable of meeting this moment, meeting Mother Nature's fury, and meeting the needs of a complex society, a 21st century society that deserves and demands more from private sector partners than they've experienced. So that's a broad strokes where we are. Just gratitude. Thank you to all of the people behind me and all the community leaders that are out there working hard. We're not out of the woods, but we are leaning in the right direction. We're happy to answer any questions.
Governor, one of the things that some of the evacuees, especially up in the northernmost areas that we'll talk about is on their evacuation routes, it's taken them an incredible amount of time to get out, some saying 4 hours or more.
Yep.
What do you know about that, and what can we do to make the evacuation routes better?
Well, we were talking to 5 young ladies from Sebastopol that said specifically it took them 3 hours to get out. One, the 6th person who was at that table said she got out because she had left 2 hours prior. It's difficult. Some of these areas are rural. Some of these areas only have one core evacuation route. Otherwise, it's back areas which could be potentially dangerous. So these are difficult things. Here's what's changed. We've been more aggressive in terms of our focus on evacuation, emergency planning than we have in the past. We've been working with local electeds. We actually had an emergency summit in June, working with a lot of local elected officials, looking at best practices, sharing those best practices on alert systems, backup to alerts when cell communication goes down, and how we can use first responders to use sirens, traditional mechanisms of communication, particularly for vulnerable communities, hard of hearing, people with disabilities, and the like. And I think you saw those at scale and at work. But we still have work to do with some of these evacuation areas, and that will continue to be a stubborn reality.
The other day in the press conference, the CEO of PG&E talked about the jumper cable that may have started this, the jumper line from the main transmission tower, that their model did not have that tower shut down, the main transmission line, because they didn't see peak wind events. Does that need to be re-examined, you think?
Yeah.
Because obviously something went wrong here.
Yeah, no, all of this is being re-examined. Look, we had the Ridgecrest fire down in LA. We're investigating that and what occurred. We're going to be investigating this. I don't want to opine on any facts until they're determined objectively, and then we'll make the appropriate decisions as it relates to accountability, responsibility, and then protocols and procedures moving forward. This morning, I met with my new chair of the Public Utilities Commission. I just want to remind you of the new requirements already at play. There is a plan to get out of this. This is not the new normal. And with respect to the CEO of PG&E, this is not a 10-year process. Let me reject that outright, that anyone should have to expect a 10-year process to deal with this reality that we're experiencing. That will not be the case. They will be held to account to do something radically different. They're required to invest $5 billion now. It's the law. We just approved that effort to provide $5 billion of public safety improvements. Every year they have to be certified as it relates to their safety plan by the Public Utilities Commission that now has a new safety committee that has been established, brand new. We also have tied compensation to the board members and executives at these utilities to safety. Their compensation, their bonuses are tied to safety. That is also new. It's a new requirement. We also are bringing the best in the partnering with CAL FIRE and others within the safety committee that we have established and the advisory committee that we've established at the Public Utilities Commission. My new director of the Public Utilities Commission has been all up and down the state having public hearings, including 48 hours ago in Reading, and she is ready to hit the ground on new protocols, procedures, communication strategies on these blackouts. We will not bail out PG&E, but the protocols and procedures are being scrutinized and accountability will be advanced. And I continue to demand of PG&E to compensate people for this disruption, for the loss, and we will do everything in our power, formal and moral authority that is afforded us to make sure that they do the right thing for their customers.
So we're hearing that there is a language barrier apparently outside, that there are people not willing to come in because there's nobody there really explaining them anything, particularly Latinos. Is there anything that's being done?
Yes, and I appreciate that, and we have these flyers, and we are doing our best to be in a culturally competent way to communicate. I just met with a number of those leaders. They expressed similar concerns. Look, let us be honest and truthful about the world we're living in. You're living in an environment where people are scared to death, mixed status families, that the federal government's going to come in and deport their loved one, a family member. It is remarkable that in emergencies like this, people still feel that way and are unwilling at times to provide their identification to people that are there to help them. Let me make this crystal clear. We have your backs to our diverse communities, regardless of your immigration status, or you have a loved one, your grandmother's there, you may have status, but your grandmother doesn't, or vice versa, and you want to bring her in and get help, you can get help, and we will have your back, and we will protect you. You will remain anonymous, and you should not be concerned about that. So this is a legitimate concern. Language barriers, legitimate concern, but also that backdrop as it relates to immigration enforcement. This is a no enforcement zone, and we will deny any efforts to create an environment that gins up that fear.
What are the flyers just really quick?
These are just, and we're handing out these flyers, and there are a number of community leaders here representing our diverse communities that are making sure they engage folks that are sleeping in their cars in parking lots next to shelters that can be taking care of them, but are scared to death to walk 25 feet because, quote unquote, the government is inside that building. This is serious stuff, and it's just another byproduct of what is going on and going wrong at the White House. And I wish the President of the United States would do the right thing and talk in terms of these kinds of conditions and emergencies and express that these are zones of safety and sanctuaries in language people can understand where people shouldn't be concerned.
Governor, you mentioned that this emergency declaration opens the door for more resources coming from out of state. I'm wondering if you've had any conversations with people outside of California about bringing other resources in. And also you mentioned $1 billion in money towards trying to improve with additional assets. And are you anticipating that after this that you're going to have an equal number or equal need to continue that kind of investment?
We will continue that investment until we address this challenge. It's not acceptable. We won't, we're not going to give up until we're done. And we'll continue to do historic investments in appropriate vegetation management, appropriate forest management. We'll continue to work with our federal partners, of which 57% of the forested land in California is federal land. They've been cutting their forest management budget. At the same time, they've been moralizing about our lack of investment, which has been unprecedented and historic. Forgive me for that editorial. Number two, we'll continue to do more on pre-positioning. One of the big stories, and I appreciate Senator McGuire's reference of this Kincaid fire, was the pre-positioning that we had already put in place. Over 101 pre-positioned engines have been placed all throughout the state of California. New teams, including ambulance strike teams, that have all been pre-positioned and have aided and helped with some of our evacuation efforts. And I think things would have gotten much worse had we not pre-positioned those assets. And we now are looking to potentially annualize those investments beyond just this year's appropriation. $109 million of new appropriation went to new Black Hawk helicopters. We were getting 12 of those. The first one came into the state last week and has been retrofitted. So we have evening, nighttime suppression capacity. 7 C-130s are also coming under the CAL FIRE flag. We're doing more technology as it relates to cameras. You saw the early flash that came here out of the Kincaid that came from one of those cameras that allowed people to quickly respond. We're doing hundreds of cameras. The state put money in their budget, and the IOUs have increased their investment. The cameras, new LiDAR technology, new radar technology, new satellite technology, new drone technology, new machine learning, and new modeling, unprecedented modeling on weather that allow us to predict weather patterns well in advance so that we could pre-position assets. Forgive me for being long-winded, but I want to be precise so people understand the totality of what we are trying to achieve and the approach we're trying to take. And we are just getting going. I've been here just 9 months, not 9 years, not 19 years. We own this, but we're going to own the future. We're going to address this issue, and we're going to take advantage of all the resources, including, forgive me for long-windedness, the first part of your question, federal resources to help in these efforts. And as I said, nothing we've asked from the federal government has been denied. And I want to thank again FEMA and the administration for not playing politics with those appropriations.
Governor, you heard from at least one person today who was unhappy that he lived so far from the fire. He still got a mandatory evacuation. Do you think that how broad these evacuations were, did that save lives? What is your message?
No question, the evacuation saved lives, not even.
The fact that it was so large.
Hey, these guys are experts, world-class. Politicians, we're neither world-class or experts. And I listen to the experts. These guys have been at it for years and years. They understand the vagaries of Mother Nature and her fury. As wind conditions can change, humidity conditions can change, things can change on a dime. And you know what? We're not here to dream of regretting. And while that individual, I met with him, breaks my heart that he's sitting there with all kinds of medical condition and need, but you know what? He's getting world-class support right now. And for him to be vulnerable and alone in a community when we're just 5% contained in this fire, you can look at satellite, I'm glad he's here. And I'm sorry, and I totally, deeply regret that he's feeling that anxiety, and I understand it and I respect it, but I also respect these guys. Listen to the men and women in uniform. They're the experts. Go means go.
Governor, you had mentioned the 180,000 evacuees. That's typically a statewide number. We know
Yes.
the number of fires statewide at this point. And can you put this in perspective? I'm thinking back to 2008, the firestorm then, as far as not destruction, but the breadth of this compared to some of the previous statewide disasters.
What's so interesting about your question is potentially my response. Because it's completely counter to the feeling that we all have at the moment. The fires we're experiencing are not completely abnormal, even by historic standards. I mean, there's been a bunch of flare-ups in the last 24 hours, but the fires we've had this last week around this time of year, San Diego fires, the LA fires with the Santa Anas coming up, aren't completely out of the ordinary. The acuity, the ferocity of this Kincaid, obvious, separate and above. But what makes this moment so different is the power shutoffs that overlay it. And that's where obviously people are feeling even more stress. As it relates to the number of fires, look, they had a Grass Valley fire where our phones lit up, and we're walking over and you feel like you've gotten your arms around that. The Diablo fire, which was out in the middle of nowhere, 20 acres, you guys got to that quickly. You got to that or rather the fire near CSU, and you were able to knock that down. I mean, these guys are doing amazing work. Even the fire, Grass Valley fire, the fire up near Ukiah, it's 250 acres, now 350, but it was 0% contained an hour and a half ago. Now you're up to 20% contained. I can't believe I'm answering a question that you can answer so much better. So can you come up here and maybe fill in the blank and do more justice to the number of fires that are being sparked across the state?
So my name's Mike Bradley. I'm the Northern Region Chief for CAL FIRE. We're a little bit below the normal amount of fires for this time of year, but like the governor said, this is very typical. We will see more starts, but we won't see the growth, I don't think, as much because of our pre-positioned resources, not only from CAL FIRE, but from Cal OES, from local government. We're constantly shifting resources around, so we'll be more successful. And you've seen that today by having smaller fires, and we do have one large fire taking a lot of resources.
So it's counter to, again, the way people are feeling, the way, perhaps even the way we're approaching things, but we're taking nothing for granted is the point. We're being as aggressive as we've ever been. There's no passivity here. And again, the overlay of these power shutoffs legitimately create conditions and environment that's even more anxiety-inducing and potentially life-threatening. And I'm not naive about that. I was just at a Novato hospital working with the hospital administration to get backup oxygen tanks, of which they're having a hard time procuring for people that are in their homes but don't have electricity. And as the electricity continues to go out, or rather remain out, those concerns increase. And that's why we are just getting started, and we have an enormous amount of work to do in the next 3 or 4 days until all the power is restored.
All right, last question. All right, thanks everyone.
That was silence. Take advantage of it.